Welcome back. We will continue our discussion on technologies for supply chain. In this context, we are going to study about the interoperability of information system. In particular, in this lecture, we are going to discuss the dimensions of interoperability with one example. In fact, we will continue the VMI example that we did few classes back. Then we will be talking about B2B interoperability technical layers. So, while talking about this supply chain integration issues, we saw that the supply chain integration basically consists of two parts. One is supply chain collaboration, another is supply chain interoperability. While supply chain collaboration deals with managerial issues which are mostly strategic, this interoperability deals with technical issues. All these details of all these things with some examples of various problems in interoperability we did in one of the previous classes, and I expect that knowledge people have while going through this lecture. So, that understanding we will continue with that example that we did in that class about this vendor managed inventory system. Now, we have also know in that class that this interoperability has 4 dimensions. In fact, we discussed about this interoperability of data and interoperability of service, but additionally there are 2 more dimensions which are interoperability of process and interoperability of business. Now, because we have little bit of technical background build up so far, we will be able to understand these points better. Now, when it comes to interoperability of data, 2 major concerns are under this. First, finding and sharing information from heterogeneous databases is a problem. Why it is a problem? Because they reside on different machines which have different configurations, different operating systems, different database management systems, and so on. Then second concern here is, while we also have to not only we have to make this technical compatibility possible, but we also have to resolve the semantic differences that exist with the structure and content of the database. The data exchange standards such as EDI and XML are important. We are going to study about them and we are going to find out how they are able to solve the interoperability problem at this layer. Then comes the interoperability of service. It is about identifying, composing and operating together various applications that are designed and implemented independently. In fact, last class we did not discuss about this interoperability of service, but because we were not in a position to have the adequate background for this one. But anyway, while talking about this, we will know about various architectural frameworks which enable such integration. Then fourth is the interoperability of process. This process interoperability means linking different process descriptions to form collaborative processes. In this context, while a service interoperability of service requires integration of 2 nodes in a workflow, by interoperability of process we mean integrating all the nodes in a workflow, so that one entire business process can be conducted. So, for this one we will be talking about how to extend these web services, or how this web services framework is extended to handle complete automation of a business process, a complete automation of a workflow. Then we are going to talk about interoperability of business. They are technical, but they also require something which is beyond technology concern. For example, if you are going to automate a business process which is inter-organizational, look here when we are talking about interoperability of process, data, etc., it is with respect to two different organizations. That is why the systems are different. So, while we do talk about such interoperability of process, we we have the concern of combining all the legs in a workflow. This by all the legs I mean the entities which existing in the workflow, they need to communicate, and this communication of all the entities makes the workflow. And that workflow, when we consider that workflow across two organizations, then a part of that may be in one organization and another part of that process may be in another organization. So, if while implementing this, if it is necessary, both the organization may agree upon to re-engineer their original process. So, this interoperability of business is about resolving all the technical issues along with re-engineering the entire business process if necessary. We continue with that motivating example of vendor managed inventory system, and this example we discussed in one of the earlier classes. Now, we are going to see what are various compatibility issues coming here and how this can be resolved. In fact, we are going to continue with this example in some of our subsequent lecture. Again, let us remind you about this vendor managed inventory system. In the vendor managed inventory system, the supplier takes care of the retailer's inventory. So, in fact, the retailer shares his point of sales data as well as his stock level in the retail store, so that accordingly the supplier makes his plan to supply the items. So, these two cycles are executed, one at the supplier side and another is the retailer side. So, when we talk about a workflow and the activities within this workflow, look, this is one activity, maybe some entity is responsible for this activity. Of course, if it is automated, you cannot assign any human being, but some program is responsible for doing this. Then this program is connected to another program, again another program, and so on. This is how this whole process of retailer stock status checking, consignment stock status updating, waiting and updating the stock status when the consignment stock usage begin at the end of the retailer, this whole cycle continues. Similarly, at the retailer side as well, we have this whole process repeated every time. Every time a consignment stock is sent and it is opened, this whole cycle keeps repeating. So, if this process look, we while talking about different types of decision making scenarios, we learnt about some decision making scenarios are structured, some are unstructured and some are transaction type. Here basically if you look at here, there is absolutely no complex decision making scenario. It is simply repetition of some transactions that has to happen because of the VMI contract, which you can say at a strategic level made by the buyer and the supplier. In fact, if you look at this, maybe possibly this calculation of reorder point requires little bit of some transaction level decision making, but otherwise it is all simply updating the stock, repeating some activities only. So, let us try to figure out what are various issues that come up while automating this process at both the end, then connecting both these processes. Now, where exactly the connection is taking place? Here connection is taking place. The retailers is checking, the supplier is checking retailer's stock. So, it has to get that information from retailer side. Here of course, it is doing his own activity, the supplier is doing his own activity, here also it is doing his own activity, but here it is again getting some information from the retailer, that retailer has started using the consignment stock. In fact, he is also providing some information like the purchase order generated at his end, then dispatch status of the consignment stock, etc., to the retailer as well. Here also at the retailer side, retailer is responsible for providing his stock information to the supplier, and it also sends varieties of information like when it starts using its consignment stock, he informs the supplier. Then when he receives the invoice, he also informs the supplier about the payment initiation of the payment process. This is the information flow from supplier to retailer. Supplier requests retailer to get the stock level, retailer sends the stock level, supplier prepares the purchase order, it sends the sets the consignment stock detail and sends it to the retailer, retailer acknowledges the receipt. Then when retailer starts using the consignment stock, it informs the supplier and supplier sends the invoice. So, in order to automate this, you can see in some of the places supplier is the entity who is initiating this flow, and sometimes the retailer is this, in fact this dotted lines are the retailers. Whenever retailer initiates any retailer sends any information, it requests, it sends. Let us try to see how exactly all these terms are relevant in case of VMI implementation. Start with interoperability of data. There are various data items. During information flow, we saw there are various types of data items which is sent from the retailer to the supplier and from supplier to the retailer. Now, consider the fact that while sending this information, when it is going to be stored in the database of the either side, is there any common format they are using? If somebody is using a database DB2, somebody is using a database of Oracle, where the schema information, the description of the items are different, then how is it going to be handled? For example, consider that stock level is some data which is let us say coming from point of sales source of the retailer to the supplier. Suppose at the retailer side, this point of sales device is attached to the retailer's ERP system. So, it captures this point of sales data, and this data, let us say this stock level data, the retailer's system gives a name called, let us say this stock underscore level. So, when the data will be sent to the other side, data will be sent as a pair of the name and value. So, name of that item is stock level and their value will be maybe some 10 unit, 20 units and so on. So, when this name value pair is sent to the other end, because without that name simply you send the value, it is actually meaningless. Simply sending 10, what does it mean indicate? It indicates nothing. It can be 10 mangoes, it can be 10 anything, 10 trucks, it can be anything. So, a name has to attach to the data. So, now the name which is attached by the retailer is stock level. So, at the receiver side, that is supplier side, suppose to indicate the same data, it uses the term current stock level. Then unless otherwise they resolve the fact that this stock level, stock underscore level, this one stock underscore level, that is this fact is this one is same as that of the current stock level at the supplier end, stock level and current stock level at both the ends are same, there will be problem in understanding the data. Then interoperability issue at the service level. So, interoperability of data, interoperability of service. Next one is interoperability of service. Now, we are talking at a much lower level, whether we are talking about the data elements and their name value pair. Now, this data where it is stored? This is stored in the corresponding in the databases of the corresponding ERP system. Assume that both the parties have their own ERP system. Now, assume that this data, when it has to move, it cannot go directly to the database. It has to pass, there has to be some ERP has to provide some interface through which the data has to be entered to the database. Assuming that both the parties have two different ERP systems, let us say one party has SAP R3 and other party has Oracle e-business suite. Both of these are ERP application packages. Are they compatible? In order to make both of them compatible to send and receive data, what has to be done? So, this issue is the problem at interoperability level. Then come look at the interoperability of concept of the interoperability of process. At both retailer and supplier side, we saw some cycle is happening and that cycle, the transaction cycle continues to happen, and that transaction cycle involves several data exchanges. So, it is not one service which can automate this whole process. A number of services has to be together working towards automating that complete workflow, that complete transaction cycle. So, in this particular context, the problem is how to coordinate these small individual data exchange steps, so that the whole process is automated. Then you have the interoperability of business. Now, because of suppose the companies are first time adopting this VMI and they are going for developing a information system which will automate this interorganizational workflow. Now, due to this new information sharing framework, will the process be re-engineered? This is the interoperability issue at the business process level. Now, let us be a little bit more technical. This interoperability technical layer tells us how exactly the data has to be exchanged between two entities to automate the process. We start with the communication level first. It is the lowest level, and in this level multiple your TCP/IP protocol etc., has to be there at the lowest level, and multiple protocols exist, and we expect that all those protocols should be compatible with each other. So, at network level, as I was telling you, various TCP/IP protocol is there, the transfer of data, there are some basic formats, and all these making them compatible is not the work of the information system, but information system is hosted within a network. So, therefore, unless otherwise these network level compatibility issues are resolved, two networks cannot be communicating. Then at this level, for making two different systems work, we have the idea of this remote process invocation, remote procedure calls or remote method invocation, particularly in programming like language Java. So, in case of this remote procedure calls, which is associated with some object oriented terminology, and to in the object oriented world, if the both the parties implement the information systems which uses some kind of object oriented technology, then in order to communicate with each other, the objects at both the ends need to be connected. The message has to pass between the object at both the ends. Now, how exactly this is possible? This is possible. See, each object has two parts. One is its attribute, second is the methods, the operations which are carried out on the attributes of the object. So, in order to pass a message to the object or in order to communicate with the object, which is the basic entity of information system building, we should be able to make a call to that entity and to the procedure of that entity. Now that both the information systems reside in two different locations, have two different technology maybe, then how exactly this communication takes place? There are various, this in general this is called remote procedure calls, but there are variations. For example, Java implements something called Java RMI, this is remote method invocation, but there is but that becomes now Java technology dependent. Now, there is another standard which actually tries to make it technology independent and platform independent. So, this technology is called object management groups, some common object request broker architecture. So, if both the interacting parties follow this common Corba architecture, the objects that need to be communicated, they need to be aligned with this Corba architecture. As a result, they will be able to communicate from remote places even if they stay onto heterogeneous systems. Okay, with this we finish this lecture on communication at the interoperability at the communication layer. Next class we will be talking about the interoperability at the content or data layer. Thank you very much.